Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our final application workshop for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We are very excited to have you today. For one reason, this program will offer more money than it has in the past 20 years in this upcoming cycle at $40 million. So we'll go through all the details today, and by the time you're done with the workshop this morning, we hope you'll be ready to apply. I'll have our team introduce themselves. I'm Victor Patino on behalf of Cedric Mitchell. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Natalie B., and I'm the Competitive Land and Water Supervisor. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, thank you for being with us this morning. I'm Adela Valdez, and I'm a Competitive Project Officer.
Good morning. My name is Megan Harrison. I am also a Competitive Project Officer here with OGALS. And I also want to introduce several people we have working behind the scenes today. Sam Cadeau, Esmeralda Bermudez, Nikki Lambert, Cal Bolin, and Richard Rendon. Thanks to all of their help in making this run smoothly.
Okay, great. And at the end of the workshop, we normally end around, I'd say around 9:45 or so. We'll have a question and answer session for you. We'll also be monitoring the chat feature, and Natalie will go through how to find the chat feature this morning. We'll answer your questions through the chat feature throughout the webinar this morning. And I'll also give you a tip on how you can use some of our other programs as a potential match for the 50% match requirement for this program. So, if you can hang on for that, we should talk about that around 9:45. Okay, so again, I hope you enjoy the workshop, and Natalie, you're up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vic. Okay, so again, we're so happy that you're here with us this morning, and we are here to talk about the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant. And this program provides funding for the acquisition or development of land to create new outdoor recreation opportunities for the health and wellness of Californians. Since 1965, over 1,000 parks throughout California have been created or improved with land and water assistance. So we're very excited today to be talking with you and helping prepare for the next cycle of applications that will fund even more recreation opportunities, with up to $40 million available for this upcoming round. Before we get started, I would like to call attention to a few of the Microsoft Teams features to be aware of for this application workshop. First is the chat feature. And this feature is very important because it's where you can ask questions throughout the workshop. Sam is currently circling the paragraph symbol, so that is the chat feature. If you do not happen to see that on your toolbar, please exit the webinar and rejoin. If you can, please keep your questions related to the topic we are discussing. For instance, if you have a question related to eligible costs, please wait to ask your question until we're covering the eligible cost section in our presentation. We will be monitoring this chat feature throughout our session today, and we'll answer questions directly in the chat, as well as answer some of your questions out loud. If you happen to see a thumbs up icon or a smiley face or Victor's hand raised, that's just our way of communicating with each other behind the scenes of who's going to be answering your question. If you happen to have any sound or technical issues or video, please email ogals@parks.ca.gov. We have a team that's assisting with that email address and will be able to assist you with any technical difficulties you have. You can also send a direct line phone number to that email, and we can call you into the workshop. Closed captioning is also available for the workshop today. And the way that you find closed captioning, Sam's circling the 3 little dots. You just click on that and scroll down to turn on live captions. We are recording this webinar, and we will be posting a recording on the Land and Water webpage for your future reference. Before we begin, I want to show you the Land and Water Conservation Fund webpage, and thank you, Sam, for pulling that up. The first page here, you can find it at www.parks.ca.gov/LWCF. Now, this first page provides general information about the program. From this main page, you'll see a link to the application process, which we'll go over in depth today. And then below that is also the grant administration link. If you click on that, that will provide you with information on the process to follow if your grant is awarded. And it includes things such as your payment process. If you click on the application process link, we'll be taken to the site where you'll be able to find an overview of the program, the application guide, as well as some other helpful links and technical assistance documents. Here towards the top of the page, just underneath the Eventbrite section, you'll find a link that will take you to the list of competitive review project officers that are assigned by county. If you have any questions about any of our competitive programs after the webinar, the column in the green is your column to check out for those competitive project officers. And they can answer any of your questions while you're preparing your land and water application, as well as the other competitive grant programs in our office. And just a quick note, I want to let you know that the application guide, if you do have a hard copy with you, it does include a link to the Land and Water webpage, which is no longer active. So I just want to remind you the correct link is www.parks.ca.gov/LWCF. Now let's take a look at the agenda that we will be reviewing for today. All right, so we already went over the introductions and the workshop orientation. Next, I will go over the timeline for the program and also a technical assistance document that we've prepared. After that, we will jump into the application guide and go over the program overview, and then also get into the checklist items on what to submit for your application. Then we will cover the project selection criteria, which is the scored component. We will then finish up with the remaining checklist items and also cover eligible and ineligible costs. And then we're going to actually have a closeout by our manager, Victor Patino. And at the bottom of this agenda is another reminder to please email ogals@parks.ca.gov if you're having any technical issues today. And then after the webinar, please contact your project officer, your competitive project officer, with any questions. They're very happy to help. Okay, so now let's look at the timeline for the program. Okay, so the first box, right now we are doing the webinars for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This is the last one that we're doing for this fall. And so again, we are recording. If you need to go back and refer to one of these workshops later, we will have a recording on our website. February 1st, 2022, before 5 p.m. is the application deadline. This will be an online application submittal. It's going to be through our submittable portal, and that link will be open in probably a few weeks. We'll have the link available on the Land and Water page to get you to the submittable platform. We will certainly send a notification out to everyone on this call, as well as everyone in our listserv database, when the submittable platform is open and ready to accept applications. Then in the spring of 2022, we will be conducting our application review and hope to have a list of recommended projects announced by summer of 2022. Then we have in the fall to the summer of 2023 timeframe. So this really is the time where applicants will be working on their federal requirements if they have not completed them sooner than that. And so these dates are the earliest timeframes that we can guide you to expect a start date. So we think that the earliest start date, meaning federal approval by National Park Service, the earliest would be fall of 2022, but sometimes it takes applicants longer to complete their federal requirements and also longer time frame for National Park Service's review. So some may not have a start date until summer of 2023. It's really going to be happening on a flow basis, depending on how fast applicants move and how fast National Park Service gets through their review. Once you have a start date, which means federal approval from National Park Service, applicants will have up to 3 years to complete their project. So the grant performance period again will be, the earliest start date would be fall of 2022. And if that were the case, if you received a start date at that point, you would have up to 3 years. So it would be about June 30th of 2025 would be your performance period to complete your project. And again, I can't stress enough, the dates will depend on the applicant's timeline and also National Park Service's review and approval time. There are a few exceptions to the start date of when costs are eligible, and those are what we call pre-award project planning costs. We will get into that in more detail later on in the workshop today, but pre-award planning costs are those things that need to occur before construction and before you receive NPS approval. So design plans, Section 106, CEQA, etc. Those can be incurred up to 3 years before the application is submitted to National Park Service, and we expect to start doing that in July of 2022. So those are incurred at the applicant's own risk, but they can be reimbursed should the grant be awarded. Again, those are for planning costs. Okay, so we will revisit this timeline at the end of the workshop just to get another recap of where we're at. And there is another reminder at the bottom to please contact your competitive review officer if you have any questions. Now we're going to take a look at the technical assistance document, and this can be found on the Land and Water website. Okay, it's right underneath the application guide. So Sam's circling it for us. It's the Land and Water Technical Assistant Updates for 2022. This document is designed to be used in conjunction with the application guide when preparing your competitive application. It provides updates about changes from both state parks and National Park Service since the last application cycle. We will point out the updates that are outlined in this document as we go through our presentation today. So we aren't going to be going page by page through this document during our session, but we do encourage you to take a look at it later. If there's any questions, please use the chat feature. And now I will hand it over to Adela, and she will start us off in the application guide and give us a program overview. Adela?
Thank you, Natalie. Please use the application guide to prepare your application. As Natalie mentioned, we have a technical assistance document that includes any updates to the pages in the guide we are reviewing today. We will cover all updates as we go through the guide. Now let's turn to page 4 for the information on eligible applicants and grant requirements. Local agency eligible applicants are the following: cities, counties, federally recognized Native American tribes, joint powers authorities, where all members are public agencies, and recreation and park districts and special districts with authority to acquire, operate, and maintain public park and recreation areas. There's approximately $40 million available in this round of competitive funding. There is no minimum grant request amount. The maximum grant request amount is $6 million. It is an option for an applicant to establish a grant request range, meaning specifying the lowest amount the applicant is willing to accept for the grant. A match of no less than 50% of the total project cost is required. For example, a $10 million project may request up to $5 million in grant funding. Page 45, which we will review later today, discusses eligible match sources. In general, most federal sources are not eligible for match, while state, local, and private sources, including donations and volunteer work, are eligible. At the bottom of this page is the rate of reimbursement. Awarded projects are provided grant funding through a reimbursement-only process, meaning applicants must have the total project cost funding available up front and submit reimbursement requests for expenditures. With that, the rate of reimbursement is a percentage of the land and water grant amount in relation to the total project cost. For example, a project with a $4 million total project cost and a $1 million grant amount from Land and Water would have a 25% reimbursement rate. In this case, OGALs will reimburse 25% of the total expenditures submitted with each payment request. We recommend that applicants underestimate the total project cost and not build in large contingencies, as finishing a project under budget will result in the grantee not receiving their full grant amount as expected. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here is Megan.
Thank you, Adela. Please turn to page 6 to discuss eligible projects. Eligible projects are acquisition projects that result in a new recreation opportunity for the public within 3 years and are actually a priority for this program, receiving maximum points through the scoring criteria, or development projects. Please note that for development projects, applicants must own the project site land in fee simple. Combination projects involving both acquisition and development are not eligible for this program. In order to be eligible, all projects must meet at least one SCORP priority. We have a newly updated SCORP, which we will discuss further when we get to checklist item number 3, the project summary. Let's turn to page 7 to look at examples of eligible acquisition projects. Through this program, acquisitions can create a new park, expand a park, and create a buffer or view shed for an existing park, and these are just a few examples. Acquisitions must result in a new recreation opportunity for the public within 3 years after the completion of the acquisition. Since combination projects are not eligible, this means that applicants must propose to either have a plan and funding in place to develop the land within 3 years after acquisition, or acquire land that already has a recreation feature on the property that will immediately provide a recreational opportunity, such as lands with trails or a walkable fire road, or land which will serve as a buffer or view shed for an existing park. Spoiler alert, when we get to the project selection criteria, you'll see how this scenario will gain more points. Reach out to your assigned competitive project officer if you have any questions on the eligibility of a proposed acquisition. Now let's turn to page 8 to look at examples of eligible development projects. For this program, development must be for outdoor recreation. Indoor recreation structures such as community centers are not eligible. Examples of eligible projects include constructing new athletic fields and courts, gardens, dog parks, open spaces, outdoor fitness equipment, playgrounds, trails, and more. Applicants are in no way limited to the items included on this list. Renovation of outdoor recreation items and construction of major support amenities such as parking lots and restrooms are also eligible. Please note, while this guide includes public art on the right-hand column here on this page, it recently has become ineligible when only used to enhance the appearance of the park. National Park Service views this as unrelated to outdoor recreation use of the site. However, sculptures, walls, and other artistic features that can also be used interactively, like a climbable turtle sculpture in an animal-themed playground, are eligible. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now I'll hand it over to Natalie.
Thanks, Megan. Now we are going to skip to page 10, the application process, and I will cover a few key points from this page as well as page 11. The application deadline again for this round is February 1st, 2022 before 5 p.m. And we really encourage, as soon as you get that notification from us that the application portal system's open, to start working on your applications now. And please don't wait until 4:59 on February 1st to try to hit the submit button. We do recommend, again, that applicants review all the technical assistance documents, including the application guide, the technical assistance update document that we referred to earlier, the grant administration guide, the eligibility chart that Adela will go through a little bit later, and the 2021 to 2025 SCORP to gain the full understanding of the breadth of this program. As I mentioned, applications will be submitted through the submittable online application system, so hard copies will not be accepted. And it will take us about 4 months to conduct our review and forward the recommended applications to National Park Service. As I also mentioned earlier, we estimate that projects may be ready to move forward as early as October 2022 with the earliest start dates that we can anticipate. Although sometimes National Park Service's review and approval can take anywhere from about 3 to 9 months, and we cannot fully predict their timeline. With that, please keep using the chat feature if you have any questions. I'll turn it back over to Adela.
Thank you, Natalie. Now let's proceed to page 12 to view the grant performance period. The grant performance period begins on the official National Park Service approval date. Both acquisition and development projects must be completed within 3 years of the start of the grant performance period. Eligible planning costs may be incurred up to 3 years before the application is submitted. We will discuss these further later in this webinar. Reimbursement requests can be submitted to the state after the National Park Service approves the project and obligates the funding. Page 13 provides a brief overview of the eligibility chart, and page 14 is an older version of the chart. Let's now go to the Land and Water webpage to look at the newest version of this chart. So Sam will be taking us to the Land and Water webpage, and from there we'll be able to look at the new chart here. Sam is circling his cursor where the link is, his application eligibility chart, revised September 2021. He clicks on that link, and there we are. Here is the new eligibility chart. So the key notes to include to recognize on this chart is, for number 1, note that the SCORP priorities have been updated and can be found in the new SCORP document. For number 2, will the applicant become the landowner through the acquisition, or for development projects, does the applicant own the land at the time of application? For number 4, note that the PDESF has been replaced by a new form, the Application and Revision A&R form. The updated chart has the applicable updated A&R section, and we will discuss this further under checklist item number 12. Also, note that CEQA and the A&R form should be completed at the time of application, although both may be completed no later than 60 days after the application deadline. Again, if you answer no to any of these questions, the project is ineligible. We recommend that you select a different project for this program. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here's Megan.
Thank you, Adela. So we will jump back into the application guide and turn to page 15 to discuss the application packet. As previously mentioned, applications will be submitted through the online submittable platform. If a checklist item is pending, provide a placeholder stating what the next steps are for completion and include an estimated date the item will be complete and submitted to OGALS. Checklist item number 4, however, cannot include a placeholder. All project selection criteria responses must be submitted by the application deadline. Please note the second to last bullet point on this page. Please only send requested items and do not send letters of support that are addressed to our department. Excuse me. We understand the work it takes to get these letters. Instead, focus on planning the project. If you are required by your director to get letters of support, please have them addressed to your organization, not National Park Service, state parks, or OGAL staff, as that would slow down our review process. All projects are reviewed based on the merits of the project using the project selection criteria only. Let's turn to page 16 to take a look at the application checklist. So checklist items 1 through 9 and 11 through 15 are required for all projects. Checklist item 10, section 106, will be requested at a later date. If the project has already completed section 106, please do include it at the time of initial application. As mentioned, checklist item 12, the PDESF, has been replaced by the new application and revision or A&R form, and we will go over the new form when we get to checklist item number 12 in our webinar today. Checklist items 16 through 18 there at the bottom are required for acquisition projects, and checklist items 19 through 20 are required for development projects. Now, checklist item number 21, the detailed budget narrative, is not included in this list because it is new and it is required for all projects. We will cover this form when we go over the other cost-related forms. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions, and I see that Victor has some questions to answer for everyone.
Thank you very much, Megan. So the first question, that's a great question from Roger, and really a key question. Roger asked about the project start date and who determines that project start date and at what point of the process. So the project's start date is established by National Park Service. And the way this program works is if we select your application for funding, you'll then complete the federal requirements, which is section 106 and environmental. And when National Park Service reviews and approves the project, National Park Service establishes a start date. So this all means that the actual land acquisition, if you're applying for acquisition, or land development, if you're applying for development, must be on hold until the section 106 and environmental clearance is approved and National Park Service approves your funding by providing a start date. We then issue a state to local grant agreement, and we'll provide guidance on your start date at that point as well. Okay, so great question. We also had a good question from Tom about where are the SCORP priorities located in the SCORP. When we get to criteria number 1, we'll actually go to the SCORP website and show you where the priorities are located in the SCORP website. But I'll also post a link as well in a few minutes. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Victor and Megan. Now we will cover page 17 and 18. On page 17 just has a brief introduction and instructions for the application form. So we're going to go ahead and turn to page 18 and look at the form itself, which is checklist item number 1. Here you can see there are fillable boxes for information regarding the project and the applicant. The maximum grant request amount, again, is half of the total project cost, so up to $6 million. For applicants that wish to include a grant request range, you'd list the minimum grant request amount, if willing to accept less than the maximum amount stated. So for example, if the total project cost is $10 million, the applicant may ask for up to $5 million. But the applicant can also indicate its willingness to accept, say, $4 million, the lowest possible amount that they're willing to go, and reflect that amount under the minimum grant request. Again, showing that that's the lowest amount the applicant is willing to take. Please note that applicants that choose to include a range must be able to complete the full project scope regardless of how much grant funding is ultimately awarded. So in that example, if your amount was 10 million and you did choose to put in a range and your lowest amount willing to accept was 4 million, and that's what you ultimately were awarded, you would still need to make sure that you can complete that full $10 million scope. And then down at the bottom, the authorized representative will sign this form and all the other forms that require signatures by the authorized representative, officially approving each form. Now let's turn to page 19, which includes information on checklist item number 2, the authorizing resolution. The authorizing resolution shows that your governing body approves the application and provides a point person to sign the forms. The instructions are located here on this page, and then if we turn to page 20, I want to point out number 4 in the resolution. Thanks, Sam. So down here in number 4, you'll see that a position title should be put here, not a person's name. So that authorized representative should be a person's title, not their name. Please do not change the language in this resolution template. However, an applicant can reformat it if needed. Okay, so that wraps up the authorizing resolution, and I will turn it over to Adela. Thanks.
Thanks, Natalie. Now let's proceed to page 21, checklist item number 3, project summary. The project summary is not scored. However, responses help determine eligibility for the land and water program. This checklist item has 2 parts. The first identifies a type of project, providing 3 general descriptors: regional park or wildlife area, citywide park, or neighborhood or pocket park. For the second part, applicants will identify the applicable SCORP priority or priorities for this project and provide a brief description of how the project will meet that priority or priorities. The 2021-2025 Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, or known as SCORP, establishes new SCORP priorities that replaces those listed from the 2015 SCORP on pages 22 to 23 of the guide. In order to be eligible, projects must meet at least 1 SCORP priority. So now Sam is going to take us to the SCORP website so we can view where these 5 new SCORP priorities are located. So here we are on the Land and Water webpage, and you can see Sam is circling with his cursor, Parks for All Californians. And then he will click on that link. And now on the top right corner, you can see Sam is circling SCORP, S-C-O-R-P. So he will click on that link. And then that link opens up a drop box where you can see now he's circling 2021-2025 SCORP report. He'll click on that link. Now it takes us into the brand new comprehensive SCORP report. And we are scrolling all the way down. You can see the table of contents. We're circling that. We continue to scroll down on this page. We see the 37 focus groups statewide, methods, and findings. We'll continue to scroll down on this page. And until you can see now where he's circling, you can see the heading 2021-2025 SCORP Action Plan from focus group findings. And that's where you will click. You click on that link, and then that opens up so where you can now see the 5 new SCORP priorities. So let's examine these SCORP priorities one by one. Number 1, new park access, which includes creating and expanding parks in communities that lack sufficient park space and acquiring land in natural areas to expand or create new regional parks and open space recreational areas. Number 2, multi-use parks designed for all age groups in new or existing parks, which includes designing and constructing recreation features that bring families together and include multi-generational recreation. Number 3, health design goals for new or existing parks, which includes community-based planning strategies that specifically include public health as a goal. Number 4, safety and beautification for new or existing parks, which includes enhancements that make the park appear more welcoming and support longer use hours. And finally, priority number 5, preservation, which includes placing new land under land and water protection. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here's Megan.
Thanks, Adela. Please turn to page 24, which is the start of checklist item number 4, the project selection criteria, and this is back in the guide. There are 8 project selection criteria. 7 of these criteria are scored for a total of 100 possible points. Please note, points are gained in the scoring process and everyone starts with 0. Included with the guidance for each criteria are scoring rubrics to show applicants exactly what must be done to gain the maximum points. We recommend using the criteria and accompanying rubrics to conceptualize a project that scores as many points as possible. Projects that do so are more likely to be competitive. Project selection criteria number 1, unmet need, begins on page 25. Applicants will answer either A and B if applying for an acquisition project, or C and D if applying for a development project. As noted at the top of the page, a high priority project will address more than one of the scored priorities and will address an urgent unmet need compared to other statewide applications. For acquisitions, A and B request information on why the acquisition is a high priority, both based on the availability of the land and the need for the park space within the community being served. As you can see, the scoring rubric will award the most points to high priority acquisitions compared to other statewide applications submitted for this round of funding. For development projects, questions C and D request information on why this project is a high priority for the community that will be served and what effect a failure to fund the project would have on residents. And C and D are just a little bit below this A and B on the page. And then the scoring rubric is actually on the next page, on page 26, and it shows that the most points will be awarded to a high priority development project compared to the other statewide applications submitted for this round of funding. Next, we have project selection criteria number 2, type of project, which is on page 27. This one's pretty straightforward. Applicants will identify which type of project they're applying for. Acquisitions to create a new park will receive 10 points. Development projects that create a new park will receive 8 points. Acquisitions to expand an existing park will receive 6 points. And development projects that improve an existing park will receive 4 points. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here's Natalie.
Thanks, Megan. So moving right along, we'll now cover project selection criteria number 3, which is new acreage placed under land and water protection. And this begins on page 28. As part of the land and water program, parks that are funded must be placed the entire park boundary acreage under land and water protection. So what this means is that the land must remain a park for outdoor recreation in perpetuity or forever. Only acreage not currently under land and water protection counts for this criteria. If the proposed project will place new acreage under land and water protection, 10 points will be received. If a park is already under land and water protection from a previous land and water grant, and will not add any new land to the park, 0 points will be awarded. In addition, on page 29, up to 5 additional points will be given to parks placing the most acres under new land and water protection compared to all other statewide applications received. Now, project selection criteria number 4, park deficient or economically disadvantaged areas, and this is on page 30. This criteria uses either the park access or community fact finder tools, or both, to provide data on park deficient and or economically disadvantaged areas. Now let's turn to the bottom of page 54 of the procedural guide for additional technical assistance on creating these reports. You'll see at the bottom of this page and the top of page 55, you'll find instructions on creating the reports. But now Adela and Sam are actually going to walk you through the process. Adela?
Thank you, Natalie. For neighborhood and community parks, provide a community fact finder report following these directions. So we're going to start off at the Land and Water webpage. And you can see Sam is circling. We're going to scroll down. Here we go. Thank you. The Community Fact Finder tool, and he's circling that. That's our link. We're going to click on that link. And now we are going to, on the right-hand side, park access. And now we're going to go into our box here on the left-hand side, and we're going to enter in the project address, or if a project address is not available, you can type in the longitude and latitude coordinates, which is what Sam is doing at the moment. Typing in those coordinates. And then he is going to click on the corresponding blue square that says go. Once he does that, then a blue pin pops up. He's circling that right now. And then our blue pin pops up in our map here. And you can move the pin anywhere within the park's boundary, but not outside the park. After you choose a starting point of the radius with the pinpoint anywhere within the park's boundary, then you can go up on the slight left-hand side where it says Get Report. Sam is now circling that with his cursor. You will click on that box there, or rectangular shape there, and then that will allow you to print your report. So you print the report for this application checklist item. The statistics shown on the report must be the same for project selection criteria number 4. Please remember that only one community fact finder report will be accepted per application. Now for city and county-wide regional parks, please provide a park access tool report following these directions. So the same thing, we're back at the Land and Water website, and Sam is circling park access tool, and that will be your link to create your report. So we'll click on that park access tool link. And where Sam's cursor is right now in that rectangular box, you can select the city or county where the project will be located. Select the city for city parks, or the county if it will be a county-wide regional park. And now this time the Get Report is actually on the right-hand side, and Sam is circling that with his cursor. So you will click on that link to get your report. Print the report for this application checklist item. As above, the statistics shown on the report must be the same for project selection criteria number 4. Please remember again, only one park access tool report will be accepted per application. And now here's Natalie to continue with this criteria.
Thanks, Adela. Okay, so you've seen some samples, but we will refer back to these. The sample fact finder report. This report you'll use for questions A and D in the procedural guide on page 30. So, and then you're going to use the PAT report for priorities or questions B and C on page 30. So again, A and D, you'll get that information from the fact finder report, and B and C, you'll get it from the PAT report. Applicants may use a report from each tool, again, for a total of 2 reports, if both reports show the project will meet separate priorities for this criteria. For example, here on the screen, the PAT report for Arcadia City shows that the park site meets 4C, since there is more than 62% of residents living in areas with less than 3 acres per 1,000 people. However, applicants would not be able to check box B because the city has less than 24% of its residents living further than a half mile from a park. Now on the fact finder report, this shows that there are no parks within a half a mile of the project site, so points will be awarded for 4A. However, the median household income is higher than $49,119. Therefore, box D cannot be checked. In this scenario, applicants can check both A and C, representing a park deficient or economically disadvantaged area, and can obtain maximum points for meeting at least 2 of these priorities. Once again, please save your fact finder and/or PAT reports and upload them for checklist item number 15 with your application. Again, only 1 report per tool should be provided. And I will now turn it back to Adela.
Thank you, Natalie. Let's turn to page 31 to view project selection criteria number 5, population served. This criteria focuses on the benefits the project will provide to seniors, at-risk youth, and/or people with disabilities. Applicants will provide brief responses for how the project will benefit each group. These responses do not need to include demographic data, but should include information on how the project design will meet the needs of these groups. 15 points will be received if seniors, at-risk youth, and people with disabilities will benefit. If none of these underserved population groups will benefit, or no information was provided, 0 points will be received. Now let's move to page 32 to view project selection criteria number 6, public input. Criteria 6 asks applicants to describe the public input process within 5 years of the application deadline. This criteria currently references the PDESF form. However, on the new A&R form, the public input section is now located in section 2B, Public Benefit, question 3 on page 4. We will go over the A&R form later in this webinar and where the question is located then. Describe the public input process in response to 2B3 and the A&R form, and make sure to copy and include the response for project selection criteria number 6. To qualify for full points, the public input process must have occurred within the last 5 years, and it must be clear that public input was gathered specific to this project. Let's now proceed to page 33 to view project selection criteria number 7, project readiness. Acquisition projects will respond to the first chart on this page and provide either a completion date for each requirement or an estimated completion date. Note that 5 points will be received for each completed item. I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of this page for a competitive advantage for acquisitions. You'll see in addition to the 10 points, 5 more points will be awarded to acquisitions that are ready for recreation immediately upon the close of escrow. Acquisitions that have the appraisal and agreement ready and do not require development will score up to 15 points because of these bonus points, while development projects will only be able to score up to 10 points. This does not mean that additional improvements can't be planned for the site. However, projects that have at least one feature available, such as a fire road that can be used as a trail, or projects that will provide a buffer to a current park will receive these additional 5 points. Projects that want to preserve the view shed of a hill on the other side of the park from development, or preserve a wildlife buffer that enables park goers to see deer and other wildlife from the park, would earn these additional points. Development projects will respond to the second chart and provide either a date completed for each requirement or an estimated completion date. 2 points will be received for each completed item for a maximum of 10 points. We understand that often applicants do not have permits or bid packages prepared at this stage. Please do not let that sway you from applying for this program. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here's Megan.
Thank you, Adela. All right, we're getting close to a coffee break. I'm going to take us through the last project selection criteria, the grant scope cost estimate, and some eligible and ineligible costs, and then we will be taking a short break, so hang in there for those of you who have run out of coffee. So let's go to project selection criteria number 8, applicant eligibility, which is on page 34, excuse me. All right, this criteria is not scored. However, answers will affect project eligibility. Applicants should answer either A or B. Those of you who have administered a grant with OGALS from Prop 12, the 2000 Bond Act, until present should respond to A. Applicants who have not administered a grant with OGALS before should respond to B to describe any previous funding experience. Please note that applicants who have not ever administered a grant before, who have a record of failing to comply with grant provisions, or who have an unresolved conversion will not be eligible for this program. Project selection criteria number 8 marks the end of checklist item number 4. As a reminder, all of the project selection criteria responses must be submitted by the deadline of February 1st, 2022. No additional information or responses will be accepted after the deadline for these criteria. Now, before I jump into the grant scope cost estimate form, I see that Victor would like to address one of the questions.
Great, thank you, Megan. So this is a really good, I guess, transition to get into some more financial discussions when we cover both the grant scope cost estimate form as well as the funding sources form. And we have a good question from Roger again, and Roger's definitely asking us some great questions here to help with our presentation. So Roger's question is, he has 2 questions about both financing the total project as well as when you can start construction. For financing, Roger was questioning if there's an issue of supplanting funds, if you have to identify how you will finance the total project. And for this program, because it is reimbursement only, that's not an issue. In fact, the bigger problem has been when a land and water grant is awarded and then there's no finance plan in place to cash flow the project and then get reimbursements. I'll tell you, it can take sometimes 6 months to even a year from the date of requesting a reimbursement to actually receiving that payment. So it's very important that the applicant has the ability and plan to identify how the project will be fully financed and what we call a cash flow plan to then get up to a 50% reimbursement of all total costs. So we'll get into the funding sources form either in a few minutes or right after break. The second question was about, let me go back and read this question because it's also important. from Roger, and the question is, if a city already has a full funding for a project and starts the construction project in June of 2022, but does not get an official National Park Service start date until March of 2023, does that mean only costs incurred after March 2023 are eligible for grant reimbursement? Now, I'll answer that question by saying generally that means it would literally kill the grant. The grant will not be feasible. The only way there could be, well, let me backtrack. The reason why is because you have to go through the Section 106 consultation to make sure that the project does not have any significant effects on historic and cultural property in the project area. And secondly, the project has to receive NEPA clearance. And so if you would start construction without those two things and without a National Park Service start date as well, I don't see how National Park Service could even approve the project. The only way is if it's clear there's two separate project areas for separate phases, and the phase that will be the land and water grant plus match is a separate environmental, cultural, historic review from the phase the city would start earlier. That's pretty rare for that to happen. If you think that is applicable in your situation, you can send an email with a description of the overall area and what phase you're applying for, and we would look at it to see if it has potential, and then we would probably consult with National Park Service and say, hey, here's a scenario, interesting scenario. What do you think if this project were to move forward? Okay, so that's the best guidance I can have provide for you with limited information about the project site at this time. So great question again. Thanks.
Thank you, Victor. And we are right about at that hour mark. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break now, and we'll come back at 9:05. And then we'll continue with the grant scope cost estimate and eligible and ineligible costs then. See you soon. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you had a lovely quick break. We are now going to go back into the guide, and we'll turn to page 35, checklist item number 5, the grant scope cost estimate form. This form will be used to establish the grant deliverables for the project and provide a concept level cost estimate. As such, only recreation features and major support amenities should be included. Project deliverables listed on the grant scope cost estimate form are what OGAL's, state and federal auditors and the public will expect to see upon final grant payment. Please don't list future phases beyond what will be completed with the grant plus committed funds. Minor features such as benches, contingencies, grant and construction management, and other non-scope items should be folded into the recreation features and major support amenities. Toward the bottom of the page, you'll see that each line of the grant scope cost estimate form should begin with one of these phrases: acquire approximately, construct anew, and renovate an existing. Moving to the top of page 36, don't include support amenities that come under $50,000. For example, if fencing, lighting, or landscaping will cost less than $50,000, those costs can be folded into one of the recreation features or major support amenities. However, when we discuss the detailed budget narrative, you'll see that applicants will be expected to identify costs for these types of minor amenities there. Now let's turn to page 38 to view the form. Awesome. So here's the grant scope cost estimate form itself. The total project cost that will be listed here on the form must equal the total project cost on the application form, the funding sources form, and the detailed budget narrative. All of those need to align. The pre-award planning costs amount that will be listed here must equal the amount on the pre-award planning costs form. These are costs during the planning phase, such as Section 106, so we strongly encourage all applicants to include these costs in their budget, and Natalie will discuss that a little bit further in a minute. If an applicant does not have a grant request range, they should provide the same grant request amount for both those minimum and maximum lines there at the bottom. As previously mentioned, applicants will also provide a more detailed cost estimate under the detailed budget narrative. Now let's jump to the back of the guide and look at eligible and ineligible costs to understand what can be funded through the program. While you won't be getting into this level of detail on the grant scope cost estimate form, you will on that detailed budget narrative form, and Natalie will be going over that shortly as well. So let's turn to page 61 to take a look at some eligible cost examples. Awesome. So here you can see these are examples of eligible acquisition costs. The cost of the land itself is eligible. However, incidental costs involved in the acquisition, such as title reports, appraisal fees, etc., are all ineligible. Relocation costs, employee services, and grant administration are all eligible acquisition costs. Moving on to page 62 and then 63, we'll cover some eligible development costs. So here the top box shows pre-award planning costs that are eligible, and some examples include public meetings, planning documents, permits, CEQA, NEPA, Section 106, employee services, and project administration. Please note that grant writing is ineligible. And Natalie will discuss this a little bit more, but in order to be eligible for reimbursement, these costs must be included on the pre-award planning costs form and submitted with your application. If they're not included on the form, we won't be able to submit them to MPS and have them be considered eligible. So eligible construction cost examples include site prep and grading, materials and equipment, construction management, employee services, and project and grant administration. Please note that groundbreaking before receiving MPS approval for the project will jeopardize the grant funding, and Victor talked a little bit about that previously. Now let's go to ineligible costs on page 64. This page includes example of ineligible costs, such as costs incurred outside the grant performance period, overhead business expenses such as utilities and mortgage or rent, costs for work outside the park site boundaries, fundraising, food, grant writing, program costs, operation and maintenance costs, and other items not related directly to the grant. And in addition, as a reminder, public art is also ineligible. Please keep in mind that if costs are ineligible for reimbursement, they are also ineligible as match. Match may only include items eligible for the land and water program as a whole. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now I'll turn it over to Natalie.
Thanks, Megan. Now let's turn to page 39 and review checklist item number 6, which is the pre-award project planning cost form. As previously mentioned, National Park Service allows for pre-award planning costs up to 3 years prior to when we send the application to National Park Service. So we expect that again to be in July of 2022. So you can go back 3 years prior to that for planning costs. As Megan just mentioned, in order to be considered, pre-award planning costs must be listed in the application. If an applicant does not include items such as Section 106 costs, for example, in the application, the applicant will not be able to later add Section 106 costs to their match or reimbursement totals. Since that process is required by National Park Service for all projects that are being recommended for funding, and previous applicants have informed us costs have been anywhere from between $10,000 to upwards of $70,000 sometimes, we strongly encourage all applicants to plan ahead and include Section 106 costs on the pre-award planning cost form at a minimum. I mean, you can include many more costs that are considered pre-award, and I'll go over those now, but at a minimum, everyone should at least plan for Section 106 costs on this form. So some examples include acquisition projects. Examples of pre-award planning costs are site investigation and selection, feasibility studies, and the environmental review. Except costs relating to appraisals, surveys, and other incidental costs those are precluded by the Land and Water Act. For development, examples of pre-award planning costs can include the preparation of cost estimates, your drawings and specs, and similar items necessary for project preparation. Again, no ground disturbing activities such as site work and construction activities are allowed as a pre-award planning cost. Those have to wait until you receive a federal start date by National Park Service. Unlike other state-operated programs, Land and Water does not have a cap on the percentage of the grant amount one can use for pre-award project planning costs. On page 40 shows the actual form, so we'll take a quick minute to look at that. All right. So here's where you're going to list the span of months and years where the costs or when the costs were incurred or will be incurred. In this column here, again, your dates should be prior to July of 2022 and not going any further back than 3 years prior to that date. And then you'll list the estimated cost and then go ahead and total it down at the bottom of this form. Now we are going to talk about checklist item number 21, which is brand new. It's not in this procedural guide. It's the detailed budget narrative, and you can find this form on our Land and Water webpage. This form elaborates on the costs identified in the grant scope cost estimate and pre-award planning cost form to the level of detail that National Park Service requires. This new form requires the following information. Each scope item and project cost should be itemized separately in the applicable category. Include the estimated number of units. For example, if your project includes installation of fencing, NPS actually wants to know what material are you using for your fencing and include that level of detail here on this form. So not only are you just going to write installation of fencing, you're also going to include a little descriptor about the material that will be used, such as wood, as well as the unit of measure, the number of units, and the cost per unit should all be included. Pre-award costs should be those incurred prior to July of 2022 and identified with an X in the column here towards the middle, a little bit to the right. Identify those pre-award costs that you listed on that form. Identify it, thanks Sam, you highlighted it for us. Indicate an X in this column here. So we can make sure that the costs that you've listed on your pre-award cost planning form are consistent as well and transferred over to this detailed budget narrative. And again, you'll indicate that by using an X in that column. Milestone dates should be included in the right-hand column. And all costs listed on this form must be eligible land and water costs, as the grant plus match equals your total project cost. And all elements that make up the total project cost must be eligible under the program, as Megan just mentioned. And a final reminder at the bottom of the form here, the total budget at the bottom here needs to be consistent with the total project costs identified in the application form, your grant scope cost estimate form, and the funding sources form. All costs should be consistent throughout your application package. Now going back into the application guide, pages 41 to 42 provide guidance on checklist item number 7, which is the waiver of retroactivity. However, National Park Service has been discouraging the use of waivers recently. So we're going to go ahead and skip over this checklist item. However, if your project needs to move more quickly than the timeline that we've discussed, please reach out to your competitive project officer to discuss this option. This option is available for urgent acquisitions, but again, it's been a little discouraged lately, and it's not really a faster route, we found out, for that process to occur. So again, if you need to talk about pages 41 to 42 a little bit more in depth, please reach out to your competitive project officer. And with that, I will turn it over to Adela, who will take us through the next checklist item. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie. Let's proceed to page 43 to view instructions for checklist item number 8, funding sources form. Use the funding sources form to identify each funding source, even the source that will cover the land and water portion. Remember, this is a reimbursement-only program. The applicant must identify funding sources that will cover the total project cost. In other words, cash flow the project. As you can see on the sample form, this would be a total project cost of $12 million. The grant request amount is $6 million, and the applicant has checked the land and water box and identified the source that will cash flow the grant amount, which in this case will be covered by the city general fund. You can also see that the box checked for the match of $6 million will also be covered by the city general fund. Thus, there are funding sources identified that will cover 100% of the total project cost, with the understanding that the applicant will receive reimbursement for the amount identified as land and water. Now let's move to page 44 to view the blank form. Next to each source, identify if it is state, local, city, or county, federal, or private. Provide a date for each funding source, showing when it was committed to the project. A date shown as to be determined or TBD will be considered incomplete. The total project cost listed at the bottom of this form must equal the estimated total project cost listed on the application form, at the bottom of the grant scope cost estimate form, and in the detailed budget narrative. Now let's turn to page 45 to view eligible match sources. The key point here is that federal funds are not eligible to be used for land and water match except a federal grant program that has statutory language included that specifically allows it to be used as match for land and water, such as Community Development Block Grants and Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act Recreational Trail Program funds. There are also a few bullets here that are important to note for acquisition projects, such as donated land for match for acquisitions must take place within the project performance period and also meet the UASFLA standards. For more information about eligible costs for acquisition and funding sources, please review pages 45 and 46. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here's Megan.
Thank you, Adela. Instructions for checklist item number 9, the land and water boundary map, begin on page 47. This checklist item requires the boundary of the park site to be under federal protection for outdoor recreation purposes in perpetuity. Many of you may know this requirement as a 6F3 boundary map. However, the section in the Land and Water Act has been changed to 54 USC 200-305 F3. So thankfully, moving forward, National Park Service will refer to it simply as the Land and Water Boundary Map instead. Provide a land and water boundary map no larger than 11 inches by 17 inches and provide all of the information that is outlined on pages 47 and 48. This includes adhering to the color conventions listed under numbers 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, and 9. And these are often missed in applications. Please also see item 8, which indicates that all entry points should be identified in black. This is often missed in applications we receive as well. A sample map can be found on page 49, but we've created an updated sample map that we'll share on the screen, and it's also available on the Land and Water website. So thank you, Sam. As you can see, here is the sample, new sample, and at the top, we've left a blank space for the land and water project number to be entered. In the map itself, you can see we've got the boundary identified in red. We've got all of the streets identified. The parcels with parcel number and acreage are identified. We've got existing buildings with square footage. We've got easements identified in purple. And right below Fun Street, you'll see that ABC High School campus has been identified. This is not in our instructions. NPS sometimes does have questions about large structures next to parks. And so in this example, we just identified this large high school campus to make NPS's review a little easier. Beneath the map, you'll see we've got the scale. We also note that the entire park boundary is considered an entry point for pedestrians. If this park was fenced, we would have those entry points to the park identified in black on the map. We've got the total acreage that would be placed under land and water protection. We've got the easement information below, and we've said that we'll provide an attachment that explains that more. If you've got a detailed easement situation, you can always do that. Underneath, we've got those signature lines, and applicants will just have the authorized representative sign the top line and leave the next two blank when you submit them to us for our review. At the very bottom, we have our standard language. If you have any questions about this boundary map, please reach out to your project officer, or you can always put that question in the chat. But now we'll move on to checklist item number 10, Section 106, National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, which is on page 50. So Section 106 is to determine whether there will be any effect on historic properties caused by the proposed project. Section 106 can be a lengthy process, especially for development projects involving ground disturbances and for existing parks over 50 years old. Acquisitions can usually move forward more swiftly. Given that the Land and Water Program has been highly competitive in recent years with significantly more in grant requests than available funding, Section 106 is not required at the time of application. However, Section 106 is required before the grantee may proceed with the acquisition of land or the development of land using land and water funds and match, including when requesting a waiver of retroactivity. OGALs will notify applicants when it's time to begin Section 106. However, we recommend reviewing the Section 106 process that's found on our website to familiarize yourself with the steps ahead of time. Now let's move on to checklist item number 11, CEQA compliance, which is on page 51. So plan to have CEQA complete either by the application deadline or no later than 60 days after the application deadline. CEQA must include the grant scope and must be no older than 5 years preceding the application deadline. For acquisition projects, the environmental review shall include the parcels to be acquired. Including a future construction project is not required because the Land and Water project is acquisition only. For development projects, the environmental review shall include the construction of the scope elements as described in the application. File the CEQA documents with the State Clearinghouse, Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Provide the CEQA compliance certification form, proof of filing the CEQA documents with the State Clearinghouse, and the final notice of exemption or notice of determination filed and stamped by the county clerk. If the project requires a notice of determination, also provide the initial study documents with either a negative declaration or EIR for a complete CEQA package. So the CEQA compliance certification form can be found on page 52, and so we'll go take a quick look at that before moving on. All right, thanks, Sam. Here's the certification form that you will include along with all of the other CEQA documentation that we just discussed or mentioned. So please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here is Natalie.
Thanks, Megan. Now we're on checklist item number 12. This used to be the PDESF form, but as we mentioned, it is now has been replaced with the application and revision form from National Park Service. So this is what the form looks like. And to obtain a copy of this, please email your competitive project officer and request a copy to be emailed out to you. This form does replace that PDESF, so applicants must submit this form as the PDESF document will not be accepted. Please review the ANR form carefully and fill out the sections that apply to the applicant's specific project type. As you can see here, there's certain sections that will be applicable and some that are not, depending on if you're doing an acquisition or a development project. All of section 3 should be filled out. So if you just want to jot that down, and it does say that here a little bit lower on the form, all applicants should fill out section 3 for sure. Now the section that's required for project selection criteria number 6, the public input that we talked about a few minutes ago, that can be found in this document on page 4. Thanks, Sam. In section 2B, public benefit, which is question 3 highlighted here. So it's really a simple question. It says, describe the process that led to the development of this proposal and how the public was involved. So go ahead and respond directly in this form, but then you're also going to copy and paste this response here, and you're going to upload it for your response in the project selection criteria number 6. That is your public input process response. Additional guidance on how to fill out this form can be found in that technical assistance document for this round that we talked about earlier that's available on our website. So that's a really good tool to use, and we've added some additional directions on how to fill out this form. Again, please request this form by emailing your competitive project officer. Now, checklist item number 13 is the project location map, and this is found on page 54 back in the application guide. Now, this is probably the easiest checklist item to be able to comply with. It's providing a map showing highway and street access to the project site, and that's it. You will be done with that checklist item, just a project location map. Now, checklist item number 14 is photos of the project site, also on page 54. You can provide up to 20 photos of the project site and its surrounding area. Please include information on the pictures or in the file name. So, for instance, files could be named site photo from the corner of X and Y streets, or site photo from Southern Park boundary looking north. That's very helpful for your reviewer to just have some kind of description of what's happening in that photo. We've already discussed checklist item number 15, the Community Fact Finder Report and Park Access Tool. The key thing to remember is to make sure you upload these reports for checklist item 15 in the application portal. So now we will move ahead to checklist item number 16, and I'll turn it over to Adela.
Thank you, Natalie. The following checklist items are for acquisition projects only. Please turn to page 56 to review checklist item number 16, public use. Describe each existing building on the acquisition parcel or parcels and the planned use for the buildings. This also needs to be described in the A&R form. Explain if the buildings or structures will be demolished to create a park or open space, and if not, describe the proposed use for them. Please note that the value of existing buildings that will not be used for recreational purposes, such as a visitor center, cannot be included in the appraised value, as the intent for Land and Water is to fund outdoor recreation. Consultation with OGALS regarding the eligibility of structures for acquisition is encouraged prior to application submission. Explain if the acquisition parcel or parcels will require development to make the parcel or parcels usable by the public. If development is not necessary, provide an explanation. If development is necessary, provide responses for A through D on this page. Remember, an acquisition must result in a new outdoor recreational opportunity for the public use in perpetuity. Only a proposal that creates a fully usable recreational opportunity that is open to the public immediately upon close of escrow or within 3 years after the completion of the acquisition will be eligible. Acquisition can be by fee simple title or permanent easement. Next, let's move to page 57. Thank you, Sam. Please pay attention to the requirements regarding special uses of acquired property, such as timber management, grazing, and conservation or preservation of natural resources. These must be secondary uses. Recreation must be named as a primary use. Agricultural use is not allowed. Pages 57 and 58 have unique ineligible acquisition examples. Please review both pages for these examples. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here's Megan.
Thanks, Adela. Checklist item number 17, appraisal and independent review or waiver valuation, is found on pages 58 and 59. So we'll go to page 58. Similar to checklist item number 16, this item is for acquisition projects only. For each parcel to be acquired, land and water acquisitions must have either an appraisal that meets the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, or UAS-FLA, also known as the Yellow Book, and an independent appraiser's review certifying that it meets those Yellow Book standards, or documentation for the value using the waiver valuation method when the estimated property value is less than $10,000. The fair market value or the waiver value will be used as the basic measure for land and water funding assistance for acquisitions, including match. The value cannot be higher than fair market value. Checklist item number 18, purchase agreement or other document showing agreed price, is on page 59. So this item is also required for acquisitions only. For this checklist item, provide a document showing the agreed purchase price between the landowner, that is the seller, and the applicant. The document must provide strong assurance that the landowner will sell the property to the applicant with a legally binding agreed upon purchase price. The letter of intent can include a provision for the agreement to be null and void if the project does not receive funding. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now I'm going to hand it right back to Adela.
Thank you, Megan. The following checklist items are for development projects only. Let's move to page 60 to view checklist item number 19, land tenure requirement. For development projects, the project land must be owned by the applicant at the time of application. Provide the deed or other document showing that the applicant owns the land. Next, let's view checklist item number 20, concept level site plan, also on this page. Provide a drawing showing where the recreation features and major support amenities listed in the grant scope cost estimate form will be located in the park. If there are existing features in the park already, include those on the site plan, but please differentiate in the legend which elements are included on the grant scope cost estimate form. If the grant scope includes a building or buildings, note the function and the building's approximate total square footage. Also, indicate or describe where and how the public will access the park and where parking is currently located or will be located. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And now here is Natalie.
Thanks, Adela. Well, this concludes our review of the guide. The final pages are the definition sections. And so if you see any of the terms in the guide that are in small caps, all of those are defined in the back of the guide. We will now review the timeline once more before we close out. All right, so again, that application deadline is February 1st, 2022, before 5 p.m. We will then conduct our application review for several months and hope to have a recommended list of projects by summer. And then at the approximate start date, the earliest that we can expect a start date from National Park Service for you to begin your project would be fall of 2022. But again, depending on how fast applicants are able to complete those federal requirements so we can get the package to National Park Service for their review and approval. And then we have to make sure that they have enough time to complete their review, which varies. Some folks may have start dates more into 2023, maybe about a year from the time that we send them over to National Park Service. Again, we hope to be able to send all applications forward to National Park Service by July of 2022. That's if we're able to make announcements and also help applicants get through their federal requirements. Section 106 and NEPA. Again, the grant performance period is going to be unique for each project. that start date will be the date of federal approval from National Park Service. And then applicants will have up to 3 years from that date to complete their projects. And there is that exception for those pre-award planning costs for things like design and specs and Section 106 and environmental process. Those can be incurred, I would say, July of 2019 forward up until July of 2022. So planning costs that are incurred as between those years would be reimbursable should your grant be awarded funding. So if you have any questions on this, please feel free to reach out to your competitive review project officer. And let's see, the technical assistance tool that we talked about earlier, make sure that you refer to that in conjunction with your application guide. The guide should still remain your main source of guidance, but as we mentioned, some things have changed since the last round, and so the new technical assistance document that we referenced today, which is on the Land and Water website, will be essential in including those changes in your application. As we close out, I do want to briefly mention another grant program opportunity to everyone. It's called the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, and in short, we call it ORLIP. ORLIP is a federal program run by the National Park Service. It's basically a sub-program of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. But the ORLIP funds projects in densely populated urban areas, giving priority to projects that create new outdoor recreation opportunities in economically disadvantaged communities. So while it's similar to Land and Water, it has that specific target intent, is for densely populated urban areas in economically disadvantaged communities, and really heavily focuses on creating new outdoor recreation opportunities that don't currently exist. Eligible applicants include cities, counties, state agencies, federally recognized Native American tribes, and park districts. National Park Service has not yet released a notice of funding opportunity, which we call a NOFO, for a future round. However, typically in the past, they've made these announcements in the springtime. So we wanted to give you a heads up because in the past, states are generally given a very short turnaround time once National Park Service announces the ORLIP program. We encourage you to visit the ORLIP website, which is www.parks.ca.gov/ORLP. And once you get to that website, you'll see that we are accepting a one-page concept paper to help applicants plan ahead. Now, these are welcomed, not required. But if you do submit a one-page concept paper to us, it will allow our staff to work with applicants to determine if your site is eligible, and also that your project scope that you're proposing would be a fit for the program based on the previous round guidelines that we've received. Again, this guidance will be subject to change depending on the federal NOFO requirements that they will be putting out for round 6. There have been 5 previous rounds of ORLIP, so this next one that we're anticipating this next spring would be called round 6. So again, we can provide feedback to applicants on their concept papers, and what we will be determining is based on our previous experience from the other notice of funding opportunities that have been released. Now, please put any final questions you have in that chat feature, and we will also take some time at the end of the webinar to go over any remaining questions. But with that, I'd like to hand it over to Victor so he can close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie, and team. And And thank you, participants, for your great questions. So I mentioned we would end at about 9:45, and here we are exactly at 9:45. So it's fun when our prediction works out. So I just want to go back to a point Megan made about this program being highly competitive in the past, and I want to really create a mind shift here. That in the past there were years when only 3 to 5 million was available, and in recent years it's increased up to about 15 million or so. But this round is, I believe, historic if you look at the past 20 years of this program, and some of us on this team have been with the Office of Grants Local Services since December of 2000. So we've been doing this for 21 years now. $40 million is, for this program, a unique high amount. And if the past amount requested would hold true for this cycle will not be highly competitive. So we need your help to make this cycle highly competitive, where we hope to at least receive about $80 million in requests statewide, which would then allow for a $2 to $1 ratio of amount requested to amount available. So help us get to about 80 million statewide at least. If the volume of applications exceeds 80 million, even better. But I would like to see about 80 million at least requested statewide, so we can have enough competition to select the most feasible projects. And that leads us to the next question. We do believe that your good work is the key for this program and for all of our grant programs. We're here to help you, because without solid applications and viable projects, these programs don't succeed. So please understand it is a partnership. We do value providing customer service and guidance, and understand that our team is approachable. They take pride in being helpful and friendly. So there is no such thing as a bad question. Do not be shy. Please contact your competitive review project officer. Sam will, on the screen here, Sam will circle where that link is found. He just clicked on it, and you'll see that our team is organized by county, and you'll use the contacts in the green column. So based on your project location. So for example, if your project is in Alameda County, it would be Megan Harrison. If the project's in Alpine County, Nikki Lambert. And if the project is in Amador County, it would be Esmeralda Bermudez, for example. I did see a question, and this is pretty unusual, but we do recognize some larger parks, regional parks, county parks, etc., could cross over multiple county boundaries. So who should your contact be? And I'd say you can just choose which one, either based on where your jurisdiction is, or where the majority of the land or water funds would be spent within that park. So you can make that decision, and we can work with you on which county contact you'll be using. But the whole team's helpful, and I just want to really encourage that final thought to be aggressive this round in what you ask for. You can ask for up to $6 million per application. And we do hope, again, to at least get about 80 million requested statewide. So we have a 2-to-1 ratio, which isn't very competitive compared to some of our other programs, like the statewide PAR program, where we had 2.42 billion, again, 2.42 billion in requests statewide. So I think $80 million target can be reached by California, and that will help our state reach our total funding goal to make sure all funds stay in California that are made available from National Park Service. The last thing I want to mention is if there's going to be a challenge with the 50% match minimum requirement, you can also contact us for some guidance on how our other upcoming programs could potentially be used as match because they are state funds. For example, the Habitat Conservation Fund, which will make available $6 million, could be a good match source because that program also requires a 50% match. So if you're interested in that, the workshop for the Habitat Conservation Fund is this afternoon. So at that, we really look forward to helping you throughout the next months for the application process. And again, thank you for your good work and your interest today. Have a nice day. We'll be here till about 10 a.m. if you have more questions. So you can post your question in the chat feature or raise your hand and we'll call on you. Thank you. Okay, any questions? Okay, if we don't receive any questions over the next 2 minutes, we will close the workshop at 9:55 a.m. Thank you. Okay, good question. Natalie's been living the Section 106 life. So Roger, I'm going to answer your question and then Natalie, see Roger's question if you have anything to add to what I'm about to say. Really good question. So parks that are over 50 years old, I believe, do get a bit more scrutiny from the Office of Historic Preservation. I definitely would say that, yes, it has to be a person that's qualified to perform the Section 106 evaluation. Now, we currently have a very experienced staff member who is a Section 106 expert and can provide guidance on how to select a qualified person to perform the Section 106 evaluation. And his name is Chris Corey, and he may be able to troubleshoot a few things. So I would recommend that if you're interested, he may be able to provide some tips and some guidance at the beginning before the Section 106 package is prepared. So essentially before the Section 106 person performs the evaluation, Chris Corey can give some tips of what are some of the things that he knows the Office of Historic Preservation will look for, especially in cases of historic parks, like Grove Park. So great question. Natalie, is there anything else you can add to what I said?
That was good, Victor. Roger, we also have a Section 106 process document on our Land and Water page. And so I would suggest that you take a look at that for sure right off the bat to see what's required. But yes, Chris Corey is available for assistance. But if your agency happens to already have someone on their staff that meets the professional qualification standards set by the Secretary of Interior, then, in order to perform Section 106, you can use that staff person. If not, yes, you will want to hire a consultant that meets those standards. And that reference code is in the process document. We also have a list of consultant list that is put out by the California Historical Resources Information Center. But by all means, that's a list provided by them. It doesn't, we can't endorse one consultant over another from that listing. So you would need to make sure that the person that you ultimately hire definitely has experience in Section 106 previously. So yeah, we can post the process document in the chat too. So it's handy right here in the chat oh, thank you. There they are. The Section 106 instructions are right there. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Okay, great answer, Natalie. Thank you so much. And great question as well, Roger. We have a question from Evelyn, and the question is, if the park previously received land and water funding a long time ago, and yes, the program does go back to 1965 grants. I believe that's the first time our office started administering land and water grants was back in 1965. Can we request funding for renovation and redevelopment? So the answer is absolutely yes. However, there is a one of the project selection criteria which does give more points to placing new acreage under 6F3 protection. And what does that mean? Okay, so when we covered the 6F3 boundary map about 30 minutes ago, it's basically a commitment from the grantee to keep that land open for public recreation use in perpetuity, so forever. And let's say the park that was funded by Land and Water years ago is 50 acres, and the entire 50 acres is already under 6F3 protection. While the site would still be eligible for land and water funding, it would not be as competitive under the criteria. And team, can you point out which criteria that is and what page to go back to that criteria? Because it is a really good question by Evelyn. I'd like to take them to the right page.
Okay, I'm getting there. Sorry.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's page 28.
Thanks.
Thanks, Megan.
Okay, there it is. Thank you very, very much, Megan, Sam. So if you look at the scoring rubric towards the bottom here, if the entire park is already under 6 of 3 protection, Sam, can you scroll down a bit on the screen into the point section? That would be 0 points out of 10. So I would definitely encourage you to look for a project site where there will be a where at least a portion of the site is currently not under 6F3. Now, I will also say that going back to 1965, there are cases where the boundary of 6F3 protection was not the entire park. Either the park has been expanded since then, or at the time, for whatever reason, National Park Service would allow just a limited area of the park where the improvements were taking place to be under 603 protection. National Park Service now requires the entire park to be under 603 protection. Okay, so you know, you can definitely, if you're not sure about the status of that park, you can send us an email and let us know what park it is, and we can work with our administrative team that handles oversight and compliance of the 6F3 requirements, and they can look into it for you. So that's also a service we can provide for you, Evelyn. Great question.
Victor, I'll also add to that too. While this is the largest point spread, you can see it's 10 points if you're placing new acreage and 0 if there's no new park acreage that's being added. But I also want to point to project selection criteria 2 as well, which is the type of project. And again, the points aren't that significant, but the highest priority, and this is on page 27, Sam, will go to acquisitions to create a new park. But if you're developing a site, development to create a new park will receive, 8 points. But if you're improving an existing park, you would receive 4 points out of a total of 10. So that's another place where renovations may not be as competitive, but again, it's eligible, and I still encourage you to apply. But I wanted to also point that criteria out as well.
Thank you, Natalie. Evelyn said you answered the next question. Thanks, Evelyn. Okay, well, this concludes our application workshop, but it does not conclude our technical assistance. As I mentioned more than a few times, please take advantage of our team being available to assist you. We need your applications, so we're here to help. Good luck, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future, and thanks again for your interest in this program. Team, you can go ahead and stop the recording and close the workshop. Thanks, everyone.